Pack your defective sister and disappear." My brother said that with a smile. He was holding my sister Wren by the back of her sweater, and it was 2:14 in the morning, and the snow in Charlotte that night was the kind that looks like salt falling sideways. She's 19. She has cerebral palsy. She weighs 94 pounds soaking wet. He shoved her off the porch and she landed on her hip on the concrete and made a sound I'm never going to forget. "I'm Ridge Halloran. I'm 29. I was standing in the doorway in a t-shirt holding my camera bag because I'd just gotten home from a double homicide on Independence Boulevard and I hadn't even taken off my boots. My brother's name is Porter. He looked at me and said, 'You too, cockroach. Grab your little flashbulbs and go.' I picked Wren up off the concrete. She was bleeding through her leggings at the knee. Her teeth were already clicking. 2 weeks later, at 6:14 in the morning, 3 IRS special agents knocked on Porter's front door. His wife Celine answered it in a silk robe, and she watched them walk past her, and she never looked at him the same way again. This is the story of how an insurance appraiser, a cardboard box labelled Christmas Lights, and one anonymous fax to the Charlotte YRS field office turned my brother's entire life into ash. My grandfather used to say something. I'll get to that. My name is Ridge Halloran, and I take pictures of dead people. That's the short version. The longer version is I'm a crime scene photographer for the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office, which means when someone gets shot in the parking lot of a Bojangles at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, I'm the guy they call to document it. I've been doing it since I was 23. It pays $52,400 a year before taxes, and it has given me a permanent twitch in my left eye and a very particular way of looking at rooms. I notice things, small things. The way a rug sits 1 inch off from where it used to sit. A nail in a wall with no picture on it. The kind of things people think nobody sees. That last part? Remember it. It's the whole reason this story has the ending it does. I grew up in a small yellow brick house on Shamrock Drive in the east side of Charlotte with my mother Ingrid, my brother Porter, who is 8 years older than me, and my little sister Wren, who was born when I was 10. Wren came out blue. The cord was around her neck. She spent 41 days in the NICU at Levine Children's, and when she came home, my mother taught me how to suction her airway with a little blue bulb. I was in 5th grade. I could already do it better than Porter, who was 18 and already looking at the door. My father left when I was 3. Porter remembers him. Wren and I don't. What Porter remembers, apparently, is a man who told him he was the smart one, the important one, the one who'd do great things. And what Porter decided to do with that was to spend the next 25 years making sure the two of us, the defective one and the cockroach, understood exactly where we stood. My mother Ingrid worked 2 jobs. She cleaned operating rooms at Carolina's Medical at night, and she did payroll for a plumbing supply company during the day. She slept maybe 4 hours. She made grilled cheese on the same black pan for 15 years, and she never ever complained. On Sundays she'd take Wren and me to see her father, my grandfather Dahl, in his little apartment off Monroe Road. Grandpa Dahl had been a butcher. He had a thick white moustache and hands that looked like baseball mitts, and he always smelled like Old Spice and pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked in 30 years. He had a saying he'd tell me when I'd come crying about Porter stealing my Halloween candy or breaking my bike on purpose. He'd say, "Ridge, a quiet boy with a good memory is a dangerous thing. Don't waste it." I was 7. I didn't know what he meant. I would find out. The thing about my job, the thing nobody talks about, is that you learn how evidence actually works. You learn how to bag it, tag it, date stamp it, store it, and how to keep a chain of custody log that would stand up in court. You learn the difference between a thing that might be important and a thing that definitely will be. You learn to trust your own photographs more than your own memory because memory lies and a picture with a metadata stamp doesn't. I didn't know yet that I'd been quietly training for 6 years for one specific night in my brother's attic. My mother Ingrid died on a Wednesday in March 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. She went from diagnosis to funeral in 71 days. Ren was 17. I was 27. Porter was 35 and married to Celine, a dental hygienist with very sharp eyeliner and a laugh that sounded like a coin hitting a plate. We met at the lawyer's office 9 days after the funeral. I remember Porter wore a navy suit with a pocket square. Ren wore my mother's old wool cardigan. I wore my work pants because I'd driven over from a scene at a Waffle House. The lawyer was an older man named Prendergast. He opened a folder. He said, "Your mother's estate consists of the house on Shamrock Drive, approximately $41,000 in a Wells Fargo savings account, and a life insurance policy." The policy was for $138,500. Porter, who was the executor because he was the oldest, had already handled it. He slid a piece of paper across the table to me and Ren. He said, "Mum left everything to me. I'm going to sell the house, pay the medical bills, and give you both something to get started." He said it like he was doing us a favor. I read the paper. It was a will, notarized, dated 6 weeks before she died. Everything to Porter Halloran. He was to use his discretion in providing for his siblings. I looked at him. I said, "Mum never said anything about this." He said, "Well, she was medicated, Ridge. She talked to me about it when you were at work." He did the smile. The smile he did when we were kids, and he'd hidden my homework under the couch. Ren squeezed my hand under the table. "She doesn't talk much, Ren. She has the speech, she just doesn't like using it." She whispered, "Ridgie, not now." She was right. Not now. I was going to need a better moment. A week later, Porter gave us a check. It was for $4,000 each. He said, "This is your share." The medical bills ate most of it. I'm sorry, guys. Then he sold the house on Shamrock Drive for $287,000 cash to a developer. He moved Ren and me into the basement of his house in Ballantine, a 4-bedroom McMansion with a 3-car garage and a fake Tuscan fountain out front. He said it was temporary. He said family takes care of family. Celine stood behind him nodding. Grandpa Dahl was 84 then. We buried him the following January. At his funeral, Porter gave a eulogy about a man he'd seen maybe 6 times in his adult life. I stood in the back row with Ren, and she leaned into me and she said, "Ridgie, something about Mum's money isn't right." I said, "I know." She was a quiet girl with a good memory. She got it from her grandfather. Celine was, to be fair, beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful. She was 31, blonde, ran 5 miles every morning along the Greenway in matching Lululemon, and had a smile that could sell you a used car. She also had a way of looking at Ren like Ren was something that had come into the house on the bottom of a shoe. The first time I really saw it, we'd been living in her basement for 3 weeks. Ren came upstairs to get a glass of water. Celine was on the couch watching one of those surgery shows. Ren moves slowly. She has a walker. She was maybe 6 feet from the kitchen when Celine said, not looking up, "Can you not drag that thing across my floors?" The sound goes straight through my head. Ren stopped. She said, "Sorry, Celine." She turned around. She went back downstairs. She didn't get the water. I came up 20 minutes later and got it for her. I didn't say anything to Celine. Not yet. Porter worked in commercial real estate. That was the thing he always told people. In reality, he was a junior associate at a brokerage off Tryon Street, and the McMansion in Ballantine had been bought with a mortgage so top-heavy that Celine's dental hygienist salary was half the reason they could make payments. I learned that later. Most of what I'm telling you, I learned later. That's how it works. You don't see the whole thing. You see pieces, and you keep the pieces, and one day you lay them out on a table. The first piece I kept was a receipt. Porter had given me the $4,000 check, and I had photographed it. I photograph everything. It's a work habit that became a life habit. I have 60,000 photos on an external hard drive going back to 2017, crime scenes, but also receipts, notes, texts, screenshots, packages. Grandpa Dahl's saying again, a quiet boy with a good memory. My memory just happens to run on a Canon 5D and a 1 terabyte Seagate. The second piece was a phone call I overheard in the laundry room 2 months after we moved in. Porter was in the garage. He was on the phone and the vent carried sound. He said, "Yeah, I had to give them something, otherwise it would have looked weird." I gave them 4 apiece. The rest is just sitting there till we figure out the clean way. The rest? The rest of what? He told us the medical bills ate the rest. Celine's voice in the background. Well, don't be stupid about the insurance money. That's the piece nobody saw. I stood in that laundry room with a basket of Wren's sweatshirts in my hands, and I felt my face get very, very still. That's my tell. Other people get hot or red. I get still. The insurance money, $138,500. I did not go upstairs and scream. I did not confront him. I walked down to the basement and I opened the little notes app on my phone and I typed March 14th. Porter, garage phone call. Said he gave us something so it wouldn't look weird. It mentioned insurance money. Celine said, don't be stupid about the insurance money. I saved it. I backed it up. That's beat 1. I was going to collect 47 more beats before I did anything about it. Within a week, Porter's behaviour toward Wren got worse. He'd always been condescending. Now he started with the nicknames: Potato, Wobble, the Defect. Once at dinner, in front of Celine's parents, he called her the family's unfinished project. Celine laughed. Her mother didn't. Her father looked into his plate. Wren just ate her food. She's used to it. She's been used to it since she was 5 years old. Porter had a habit when she was little of waiting until Mum was out of the room and then imitating the way she walked, exaggerating the jerky motion, doing it until Wren cried. Mum caught him once and slapped him so hard he bit the inside of his cheek and bled. He never forgave her for that. That spring, Celine started bringing her sister Mallory over on Saturdays. Mallory was newly divorced and meaner than Celine, which is an achievement. The 3 of them would sit on the back porch drinking white wine and talking loud enough that we could hear them through the basement window. One Saturday, I heard Mallory say, "So when do you guys get rid of the Goodwill twins?" And Celine said, "Porter's working on it. The girl's 18, she's an adult, we don't have to keep her." I'm tired of the walker scraping my hardwood. Wren was sitting on her bed doing a crossword. She looked up. She said, "Ridgie, they're trying to put me in a home." I said, "No, they're not." She said, "Yes, they are." She was right. Within 10 days, Porter came down to the basement with a brochure. He said, "Hey guys, I wanted to talk to you about some options." He handed me a glossy folder. It was for a group home in Gastonia. Shared rooms, Medicaid only. I'd been to that place once, on a job. A resident had died of a scalding burn in a bathtub. I said, "This isn't happening." Porter said, "Ridge, she's 19. She needs socialization. She can't stay in my basement forever." I said, "She has me." He laughed. He said, "You live in my basement too, cockroach. How are you going to take care of her?" I said, "I'll figure it out." He said, "Well, figure it out by May 1st, or I'll figure it out for you." That was beat 7. I remember because I wrote it down. I started looking for apartments. On my salary in Charlotte, with a sister who needed a ground floor unit and room for a walker, I could afford roughly nothing. The average one-bedroom was $1,650. I called Prendergast, the lawyer. I said, "Is there any way to contest a will?" He said, "If you have evidence of undue influence or forgery, yes, but you need real evidence and a retainer I knew I couldn't pay." I said thank you, and I hung up and I sat in my car for 40 minutes. Then Ren texted me from the basement. She said, "Ridgie, Porter's wife just came down here and told me if I didn't stop crying at night, she'd put me in the garage." I drove home. I didn't speed. I took pictures of the basement when I got there. The mold in the bathroom corner. The space heater that didn't work. The window that didn't lock. I emailed them to myself. I emailed them to an ex-girlfriend named Sloane, who was a paralegal and who I trusted. I didn't explain. She didn't ask. That's why she was the one I emailed. Beat 12, beat 13. Ren's inhaler got moved to a high shelf she couldn't reach. Porter said, "It's easier for me to grab it for her this way." It wasn't. She had an attack on April 4th at 3 a.m. and I had to break the shelf bracket to get the inhaler down. Porter was furious about the drywall. He docked it from the $4,000 he said he still owed us, which I hadn't known he still owed us, which told me a lot. Beat 15, the appraiser. Oh, the appraiser. Porter, it turned out, had been quietly trying to refinance the Ballantyne house. He needed the appraisal to come in high. A man named Kellen Voss came to the house on a Tuesday in April. Nice guy. 50s. Wore a windbreaker. He walked the whole property with a clipboard, and I happened to be in the kitchen making Ren toast when he came back in from the attic. He said to Porter, "Hey, do you know there's about 30 linear feet of old insulation pulled back up there? Someone was working on something in that attic." Porter said, "Oh, that's probably from the previous owners." Kellen said, "Sure, but some of it looks recent. And you've got a little box up there that's not taped down right. Want me to check it for moisture?" Porter said, "No, that's fine. It's just Christmas lights." Kellen said, "All right," and he marked something on his clipboard. I was leaning on the counter and I said casually, "Hey Kellen, out of curiosity, when's the last inspection report on this house?" He told me. 2 years ago, before they bought it." I said, "And was their insulation pulled back then?" He flipped through his iPad. He said, "No, clean install." Porter said, "Ridge, buddy, don't bother the man." I smiled. I said, "No bother. Kellen, I'm a photographer. I just get nosy about houses." When Kellen left, I walked Ren back to the basement, and I sat on the edge of her bed, and I said, "Ren, I need you to do something for me. I need you to not go upstairs for the next 3 hours." She said, "Okay, Ridgie." I went and got my camera. That night at 11:40 p.m., Porter and Celine went to dinner at a place in South Park. I waited until their Audi was off the street. I went up into the attic with a flashlight and my Canon and a pair of cotton evidence gloves I keep in my work bag. The box that said Christmas lights was in the far corner, under a half-pulled sheet of pink fiberglass. It wasn't taped. I opened it. It wasn't Christmas lights. It was a manila envelope, a composition notebook, and a bank statement from a credit union in Rock Hill, South Carolina. The statement was for an account opened 6 weeks before my mother's death. The balance was $134,210. The account holder was Porter Halloran. The initial deposit 6 weeks prior was $138,500. The notebook was a ledger. It had columns. Mom, medical, $18,400. Mom, funeral, $7,800. Ridge payout, $4,000. Ren payout, $4,000. Remaining $104,300. Annotation in the next column in Porter's handwriting. Transfer to PH/CH, Joint Q3. The manila envelope had a copy of my mother's will. The real will. The one where she left everything to the three of us, equally, with Prendergast's notary stamp from 14 months before her death, not 6 weeks. I did not take the box. I did not touch anything with my bare hands. I photographed every single page in sequence, with the attic rafters visible in the frame for geolocation, with a ruler next to each document for scale, with timestamps embedded in the XIF data. I photographed the outside of the box, the tape residue, the insulation pattern, the nail holes on the wall where someone had hidden the corner. 147 photographs. I was up there for 51 minutes. I put everything back exactly as I found it. I pulled the insulation back the way Kellen had noted. I climbed down. I went to the basement. I backed up the photos to 3 separate drives, and I emailed a zip file to Sloan at 1:14 a.m. with the subject line, "Please hold these. Do not open unless I go dark." Then I went to bed. I slept 40 minutes. The next morning, Porter came downstairs with coffee. He said, "Hey, so I've been thinking. May 1st is coming up. Have you found something?" And I smiled. I smiled the way he used to smile at me. I said, "Working on it." He said, "Good." He went back upstairs. That night in the basement, Ren said, "Ridgie, you look different." I said, "Ren, I found something. I'm going to fix this, I promise." She said, "Okay." Then she said, "Grandpa Dahl would be proud." I said, "Yeah." A quiet boy with a good memory. I didn't know yet that the actual detonator wasn't going to be the will. The will was evidence. The will was a lawsuit. That would take years. What I had stumbled onto in that ledger, however, was something else. The $138,500 life insurance payout had been deposited into a personal account, never reported, on an estate filing, and the ledger showed $104,300 of it being transferred, untaxed, undisclosed, to a joint account with Celine, earmarked for, I kid you not, Home Reno and Vaca. Tax fraud. Honest to God, federal tax fraud. Unreported income, undisclosed beneficiary distribution, the whole buffet. I called Sloan. I said, hypothetically, if someone wanted to report tax fraud anonymously to the IRS, what would that look like? She laughed for 10 seconds. Then she said, "Ridge, there's a thing called Form 3949-A, the tip line. You can send it in entirely anonymously. If it leads to recovery over a certain threshold, you can even get a percentage, but for anonymous tips, you just send the paperwork." I said, "And would they, hypothetically, prioritize a case where the evidence was organized, time-stamped, and photographically documented by someone who happens to do that for a living?" She said, "Ridge, what are you about to do?" I said, "Nothing. Yet." "Good night, Sloan." I filled out Form 3949-A 3 nights later at a public library off Tryon Street on a library computer printed with a library printer, paid for with 11 quarters. I attached photocopies I'd made at a FedEx office in Matthews with cash. I wrote a clean, dated, unemotional summary of the financial movements, cited the ledger, cited the credit union, cited the routing numbers, and gave them the address in Ballantine. I signed it anonymous. I mailed it from a blue box outside the post office in Concord at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Then I waited. April 28th was the night, 3 days before Porter's May 1st deadline. I was coming home from photographing a car fire on I-485. It was 1:58 a.m. I walked in the front door. I had a key, and Porter was in the foyer with Ren. Celine was behind him in a robe. He had Ren by the back of her sweater. She was barefoot. Her walker was tipped over by the stairs. He was saying, I told you no noise after 10. Ren was saying, I just needed water. He said, you need a lot of things, don't you, Wobble? I said, Porter, let her go. He turned. He looked at me and he saw my camera bag and he did the smile. He said, oh good, the cockroach is home. I said, let her go. He said, you know what? I'm done. He dragged her, and I mean dragged, to the front door. He threw open the door. The snow was coming down sideways. He said, pack your defective sister and disappear. Get your little flashbulbs. Get out. Ren stumbled on the threshold. He shoved her. She went down on the concrete porch on her hip and made that sound. Celine laughed. She actually laughed. She said, finally. I walked to Ren. I picked her up. Her leggings had a dark patch at the knee. Her teeth were clicking. I looked up at my brother and I said the only thing I said to him that entire night. I said, okay. He said, okay what? I said, okay. I carried Ren to my truck. I set her in the passenger seat. I went back onto the porch and I picked up her walker, and Celine had come out and she kicked it as I was reaching for it. The walker hit the side of my truck. I photographed it. I photographed the scrape. I photographed the porch. I photographed the snow. I photographed Ren's knee. I drove us to the ER at Atrium Pineville. They stitched her knee. 4 stitches. I stayed in the room and held her hand. She said, Ridgie, where are we going to sleep? I said, tonight at Sloane's. Tomorrow I don't know, but we're not going back there. Sloane took us in. Her couch was a sectional. Ren slept on one side, I slept on the other. At 4 a.m, I sent Sloane an email with a second zip file. Subject line, in case I didn't make myself clear last time. It was the photos from the attic. She read them at 7 a.m. I heard her in her kitchen. I heard her say, oh my God, Ridge. I said, yeah. She said, how long have you been sitting on this? I said, 9 days. She said, what have you done with it? I said, I mailed a 3949A to the IRS last Thursday. She put down her coffee. She sat down. She said, Ridge, that's going to take months to move. I said, maybe not. Anonymous tips with pre-organized documentation from a professional move faster. I read about it. She said, you planned this. I said, I didn't plan the shove. I planned everything else. The IRS moved in 11 days, not months. 11 days. At 6:14 in the morning on a Tuesday, 3 Criminal Investigation Division special agents knocked on Porter's door in Ballantyne. Celine answered in her silk robe. They presented a warrant for documents and electronic devices related to an unreported insurance beneficiary distribution of $138,500 and concealment of estate assets. They went up into the attic. They took the box. I wasn't there. I was at work, photographing a drowning in Lake Wylie. I found out from a text from a cousin of ours named Briar, who had been called by Celine in hysterics at 6:40 a.m. Briar wrote, IRS at Porter's? What is happening? I wrote, I don't know. Keep me posted. By 9 a.m, Porter had called me 6 times. I didn't answer. At 11 a.m, he called Sloane's landline, which he shouldn't have known, which meant Celine had found it in his phone from a year ago when Sloane and I were dating. Sloane answered. She said, this is Sloane's residence. Porter, you can't speak to Ridge here. He said, put him on or I'll come over. She said, try it, and hung up. At 2 p.m. Prendergast called me. He said, Ridge, I just got a very strange call from your brother asking about the timeline of your mother's will. I think you should come in. I came in. I brought the real will, photographed. I brought the ledger, photographed. I brought the credit union statement, photographed. Prendergast looked at the photos for about 11 minutes in silence. Then he looked up at me and he said, "Young man, where are the originals?" I said, "In a box in an attic that now belongs to the United States government." He laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "My God." He said, "We're going to file a petition to reopen the estate on Thursday, and I'm going to do it pro bono because this is the most satisfying thing I've read in 30 years. Here's how it cascaded, and I want you to picture the timeline because it is delicious." Within 2 weeks of the IRS raid, Porter's employer, the brokerage on Tryon, quietly placed him on administrative leave. Commercial real estate brokerages do not love it when their agents are named targets of federal tax fraud investigations. They terminated him 8 days later. Within 3 weeks, Celine's parents, who turned out to have been the ones who put down the down payment on the Ballantyne house, called in their loan. They wanted their $74,000 back, immediately. Within 4 weeks, Celine filed for separation. I'm not kidding. She filed, she moved her things out, she took the Audi, and she moved in with her sister Mallory. Mallory, who I learned had been secretly in contact with a divorce attorney for Celine since the day of the raid. Mallory wasn't loyal to Celine either, apparently. Mallory was loyal to Mallory. Within 6 weeks, Prendergast's petition was granted. The estate was reopened. The court found that the will Porter had submitted was dated after the real one and showed inconsistencies in the notary block. A handwriting analyst, hired, believe it or not, by the IRS in parallel to their own case, determined the later will's signature was a close but imperfect trace. Close but imperfect. That's a forgery, is what that is. Within 8 weeks, Wren and I had a court order returning 1/3 of the estate to each of us. $84,500 each before fees. The rest was frozen pending Porter's federal case. Within 10 weeks, Porter had sold the Audi his wife hadn't taken, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment off Central Avenue, and was working as a driver for a moving company to pay his defense attorney. Within 4 months, he was indicted. 3 felony counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, estate fraud. His lawyer negotiated a plea for the forgery to be dropped in exchange for a guilty plea on the federal counts. 18 months at Butner minimum security, 2 years probation, restitution of $186,700, including penalties and interest. He called me the night before he reported to prison. It was the only call I took. He said, "Ridge, I don't know what you did, but I know you did something." I said, "I didn't do anything, Porter." "You did." He said, "Come on, man. The IRS doesn't just show up. Somebody sent them something. Somebody who knew the account numbers. Somebody who'd been in that attic." I said, "Porter, you threw a girl with cerebral palsy into a snowstorm in Charlotte at 2 in the morning. You called her defective. You shoved her into concrete. Do you really think the universe needs my help to collect on that?" There was a long silence. He said, "I was always fair to you guys. I was always—" I hung up. I sat in my kitchen. I heard Wren laughing in the other room at something on the TV. Her walker was leaning against the wall with new rubber caps on the bottom I'd bought her. We'd been in a little rental house in Plaza Midwood for 11 weeks. Ground floor. Ramp to the back door. Her bedroom got morning light and she put a spider plant in the window that she'd named Mr. Green. She came into the kitchen. She said, "Ridgie, was that him?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "What did he say?" I said, "Nothing important." She said, "You want to watch Jeopardy?" I said, "Yeah." I sat on the couch next to her. She put her head on my shoulder. I thought about my grandfather Dahl and the way he smelled like Old Spice and what he told me when I was 7. A quiet boy with a good memory is a dangerous thing. Don't waste it. I thought, Grandpa. I didn't. I didn't waste any of it. Wren had a dream, by the way. When she was little, she wanted to be a librarian. She liked the quiet. She liked the little stamps. 2 months after the rental, I helped her enroll in a certificate program at Central Piedmont Community College. Hybrid, mostly online, accessible. She started in the fall. She wrote in a notebook every day about the books she'd read. Celine, last I heard, was selling activewear on Instagram and had moved back in with her parents. Mallory had blocked her. Celine's laugh apparently had also annoyed Mallory. And the ledger? The one in the attic? The IRS kept the original as evidence. Prendergast got me certified copies. I keep them in a fireproof box in a storage unit off Freedom Drive, just in case. One morning, maybe a year after everything, I made coffee in the little yellow kitchen of the Plaza Midwood rental. Wren was still asleep. I stood at the window and watched the light come through the spider plant on the sill. I thought about the night on the porch, the snow coming sideways, my brother's face, his hand on the back of my sister's sweater. He'd said, "Pack your defective sister and disappear." I had. We had. We had disappeared from his life entirely. We had just taken the truth with us on the way out. The coffee was Dunkin'. It was terrible. It was the best coffee I'd ever had. Wren came shuffling out in her pajamas. She said, "Morning, Ridgie." She said, "What are you thinking about?" I said, "Nothing, just the quiet." She smiled. She said, "Grandpa Dahl would like it here." I said, "Yeah, he really would."